was really kind of in a 50-50 state. What I would definitely say right now is that the jury is still out on what this has really done. This is something that we will be able to see the effect of in a few years' time, and this is something that Bungie is going to have to keep its players kind of updated about in terms of what this means for how they change their business and things. So, yeah, it's an interesting place to be. I'd say there's definitely some good that's come out of it. And as for the rest, we'll see what happens, man.
Welcome, everybody, to the Casually Hardcore Podcast. My name is Brian, and this is episode 43. I'm very happy to welcome My Name is Bife to the program, a.k.a. the lore daddy of Destiny 2. And who knows what else. You've posted some lore videos for other video games. We'll talk about that as well. If you haven't heard of Bife and you haven't seen him, I'm very pleased to introduce you to him. If you are returning or checking out Destiny 2 New Light, this is the guy you want to go to. This is the source of the story and the lore, and we're going to talk about that here in this podcast. So if you are story spoiler sensitive in that regards, maybe flag this for another day and come back and check it out. If you're not, and you're not too worried, we're going to dive into it, and we're going to be talking about it all the way up through Shadowkeep, which I was finally able to finish last night. I didn't share this in the pre-show, but I got blocked because I thought I had to get a machine gun, having returned this summer. And it turns out I didn't need to do that. People in the comments were like, "You don't need to do that, Brian." And I finished it last night, so I was very, very thrilled, especially before the podcast today. But Bife, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to those who might not have heard of you? How long you've been doing YouTube? What do you like about content creation? Floor's yours.
So, I have been in the space of YouTube for about 9 years. I've actually been doing it for 8. 6 of those years have been professional. I started technically back in 2013, I believe, is when I was first partnered. And since then I've been covering Destiny and its world, and I used to start with news, and eventually I shifted my focus to telling the story of the game. In the process of the 8 years that I've been doing this, I've gained 725,000 odd subscribers, so that's done really well. And yeah, you can primarily find me on youtube.com/mynameisbife. So yeah, the whole thing is just that. I mainly will just walk people through the story as best I can, and I hope that I'm a useful resource to people. That's primarily what I'm out here to do. Is just be someone where you can sit there and gain a little knowledge, hear a story be told.
I was always appreciated just the way that you pronounce words, because it's like, for me, I am dyslexic and struggle greatly, and our community knows this about myself, and so it's always, when somebody new comes in, they at least know that, like, yep, I might misstate something, but I've learned a lot from you. I have learned a lot from you.
I gotta tell you this, I'm right there with you on the dyslexic side of things, and there is at least a solid portion of every video that I go through where if ever there is a word which I do not know how to pronounce, I will literally just take 5 minutes in my script. If ever I've, got part of a card that I need to read, I will look through something and I will learn a new pronunciation. And so I'm saying things correctly. You won't hear epoch out of me. It'll be epoch, as it's correctly supposed to be said.
So how do you train your brain on that regards? Because, like, for me, especially in the Final Fantasy universe, I have misstated things for years. I used to, like, the joke is I used to call chocobos chobobos, and because for whatever reason, I know, my eyes saw another B, and it literally was until they actually went to voice. Like when Final Fantasy X, I was like, holy crap! Like, I was like, I'm able to hear it, and so I have to, like, train these bad processes out.
Too. I use anything audible is what's really good, which is why whenever I'm looking up the pronunciation, I don't look at the bit where it says letters in order to tell you how to pronounce it. I just get a YouTube video where it pronounces the word, and I'll sit there and I'll be like, okay, close your eyes, listen to the sounds, picture the word as you need it to, and then just, move on from there.
Cool.
For me, it's all about using your other senses to learn things.
I need to absolutely adopt that. I think I might blow my community away. Like he said it correctly, consistently in the same video. Sometimes I'm like, I think it might be pronounced one of two ways. I'm gonna just do both.
It's not to say that anyone's perfect. Like, I sit there and every single time here or there's something that I'll get wrong. But more often than not nowadays, it's stuff from other cultures that I just didn't know was pronounced in that way. So, the Takanome ranges. I hope that's correct, because otherwise I've just bungled my entire point. But yeah, Takanome is, if you pronounced it in an English way, would be Takanome. But yeah, it's not said like that at all. And I actually had a viewer who I believe either knew of or had Japanese heritage, and they actually educated me on that in the comments section. I actually replied being like, "Hey, thank you very much. I did not know this. I will make sure that I don't make a mistake like that in the future." And next video, when they happened to come up, I was like, "Hey, by the way, this is how you say it now." So literally, it's for everyone. Like, this is just hiccups. We all make our mistakes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So guys, if you guys haven't seen all of our mistakes, we've got plenty of them posted on YouTube, but I'll include all in this video when it goes up on YouTube, as well as all the descriptions for everywhere you can find us: Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, etc., in the description below, so you can go follow both on Twitter, on YouTube, and I saw that you also have a Twitch channel, so we have the link for that as well. So we'll be sure to send people your way so they can check out your content. Also, again, if you guys check out our podcast in audio form, be sure to leave us a review. Let us know what you think about the show. Helps us out and more. Last week we had Tiny Blue Games talking about Final Fantasy XIV MMORPGs, and obviously the Boycott Blizzard issue that just blew up recently, and I can't be happier that Activision Blizzard no longer is connected to Bungie.
Yeah, we dodged a bullet
massively. We still have some Chinese investors with NetEase, but I'm not too worried about that today. And then next week we have Comic Storian coming back on. Going to be talking patch 5.1. We assume it's going to be out for Final Fantasy XIV. Otherwise, we'll be talking about hype for 5.1 because we've got some news. Otherwise, we've got news to talk about with Final Fantasy XIV as well. So lots of really fun stuff coming up this month on the show. And then Krista and I are actually going to be out at BlizzCon, if it's still going on here in a couple weeks. Someone's like, "You're still going?" I'm like, "We bought
through the picket lines."
Okay. Somebody's like, "You're still going?" It's like, we bought the tickets, we bought the flights, we paid for the hotel, like everything's paid for. I didn't get the expensive flights that say you can get a refund, and so it's like, all right, yeah, I'm gonna be out there. I'm gonna see if I can get a Winnie Pooh shirt or something like that. I'm big enough. Like, I just need to get the red shirt and just walk around with some honey. Like, that'd be great. Come get a picture. But anyway, we're gonna have some fun. We're gonna see if it goes on. We have no idea.
Brian's not let in. I don't know him.
Well, just go find out. Tell me about Diablo 4 and if it doesn't suck. So beyond that, we also want to thank our partnership with Shadow PC. We've been doing all our gaming in the cloud since this summer. It's been really awesome. We have a code to work for $10 off. You can check it out. Link will be in the description below. We also want to thank our channel members and Patreons: Kenneth, Leland, George, and Kyle. Thank you guys for the support, making podcasts like this possible. That's why this exists. With all the business concluded, let's have some fun. Let's talk about some video games, because honestly, I think Destiny is the best that it's been, and I've been very, very critical of it. I quit, and I'm very happy I quit, and I'm very happy with the trajectory that Destiny has taken since that point. I put thousands of hours in Destiny 1. According to Xbox the other day, I think I'm at 200 hours on Destiny 2, so I've still got a while to get caught up and plenty of content to do. But as far as the franchise goes, because we've all shared our journeys before, you've been covering it for a long time, Vive. There have been ups and downs. We've all been on this roller coaster with this game, and I'd like you, if you can, walk us through some of the highlights for you, some high moments. If you want to, you can talk about low moments, or we can just keep this thing freaking rocking positive. I don't care. I'm gonna let you decide what you want to talk about. Vive, wow, man, it's been 5 years. This is nuts.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting year 6 technically, which is what's crazy. So by the time come next year, we will be entering that point at which Destiny is really coming into its own. I think the entire... I think Destiny's life now talks about a cycle, and a cycle that hopefully by next year will be broken. You see, the way that Destiny 1 worked over its 3-year cycle was it released in a state that wasn't brilliant, and the first year was all about building it to a place where it was a viable game in terms of maintaining an audience, in terms of just providing people with something that was a quality product that they could continue to come back to. It was the invention of things like infusion and the story of the Taken King, and creating all of this new lore that people could jump into and enjoy, and improving the Crucible with Trials of Osiris, things like that really defined Destiny 1's cycle. And by the time that Rise of Iron launched, it was smaller, but people knew that Destiny 2 would be around the corner. So everyone was very willing to accept that. And by the end of the life cycle of the game, it felt, I'd happily call it complete, The launch of Destiny 2, much to the dismay of many of the fans, reset that cycle. And so it started out again, and I wonder, actually, if this was the point at which you quit, because I wouldn't be surprised.
I'll let you guess when I quit, but please. I'm sure you're going to get it.
Curse of Osiris?
That's correct.
There we go. All right, that doesn't surprise me whatsoever.
It hurt. It hurt because...
It did. It was like we'd been led around in a circle, Well,
and by somebody who kept saying that they're listening, and then it's like, are you? To whom? And then we've always said, how do you listen to millions of people? It's like at some point, you're going to try to quantify it. But continue, please. Because you stuck with it, and I really appreciate that because...
The whole time for Curse of Osiris was unquestionably one of Destiny's lowest points. I don't think there's ever been a darker moment in Destiny's history than poor Deej on stream saying this is the most rewarding public event ever, and then being, blindsided by the game, which gives him 2 tokens and a blue. And it's just, all credit to him. He absolutely does a stellar job, and that's nothing to do with his fault on that particular one. But it's just moments like that have a certain history in Destiny ingrained in them, because it's this painful moment where, with no fault of his own, he's been made to sound like he's tone deaf there, And you've got to understand as well, as someone who was the communications manager at Bungie, and who was previously the community manager, which is now passed on to Cosmo, they are in this position where they are certainly not ignorant of anything that's going on at any one moment in time. It is definitely going on. It's just merely the fact that it's a game that is really hard to create. And I don't want to go ahead and say this thing of woe is to Bungie, but it's one of these things of people don't understand the scale of creating a video game, I don't think. So... Oh,
they don't. I'm a software engineer, and I do game dev on the side occasionally. And it's it does bite me, because sometimes that's where... in a game that you did some lore for, Anthem, that's where, even with Destiny, that's where in these games that I can see threads, I'm like, oh my gosh, if they spent 12 months, they could really flesh this out, or they could do this, and they could go in these directions. So I tend to also, I tend to lean into the possibilities. And this has worked out for me, and it hasn't. Final Fantasy XIV, it worked out for me, ultimately. And then with Anthem, it absolutely did not.
And I mean, that's just a part of Destiny's journey, for every low moment where we have something that is really sad, and it's one of those moments where people will remember it being low. We have something that's really incredible now. We have, I think, some of the best examples are probably going to be the reveal of Forsaken, and this series of, the content roadmap, right? The content roadmap for me, it was the sounding moment where I could sit there and say, hey, Bungie, in spite of all the challenges that they had to overcome, they've done this here. They've done something, right? So you look at what Luke Smith posted at the end of Destiny 2 Season 1, just as we were going into Curse of Osiris, and you suddenly compared that to the roadmap of content that was, released just before Forsaken, and saying, hey, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going, and then also to see them deliver on everything there. That's
almost
one of those
to their
almost to the T. The Crucible stuff got missed, but
to a T, but also to the a risk of their health and their well-being. And Luke Smith talked about just the stress that's on, but then you also see that passion bleed into the game. So obviously, Curse of Osiris being a very dark point. What were some of the highlights? Because one of the debates that we can settle here definitively, he said sarcastically, Taken King or Forsaken. What is the better representation of Destiny as a franchise?
Shadowkeep. Neither of
Seriously?
those two. Yes. And I say this not just because of the vision that Bungie pushes forward now, but also because of all the changes that we've already seen. Yeah, we don't have things like vendor resets. Yeah, this expansion is smaller than Forsaken with only one new zone as opposed to two. But at the end of the day, Forsaken was about launching the game back into a place where it was doing well. Shadowkeep is about the next step forward, I think. And that is why I sit here and I say definitively, of any version of Destiny that has ever existed or does currently exist, this one right now is the best that we have. This is the best time to be a player. Not just from, the systems perspective either. I sit there from a narrative perspective and say, I have never felt like it's a more important time to be playing Destiny. I've never felt like there is a better time to be invested. Definitively speaking, this is the biggest chapter in Destiny's history.
Now,
No question.
I did catch you off with that kind of the question though, from your kind of highest and lowest points. Are you stating that like actually with Shadowkeep that it is one of the highest points in your journey?
I'd say absolutely it is.
What stands out though? Like, because when I look at Destiny, and I want Chris to jump in because he's somebody who's he's playing it, but it's like does he really want to invest and jump into it? I've felt and let me know if I'm anywhere in the ballpark, but that Destiny 2 has been a journey to get Destiny 1 content back into it. We've got the moon, we've got like so much of it, we have Mars, like all of the stuff that we lost when we went from Destiny 1 to Destiny 2. Ultimately, like what would you say is still missing that you want to see brought in?
I think, if I may challenge the question in the first place, I think that's the fundamentally wrong way to look at it.
Okay.
Because Destiny 1 and Destiny 2, yes, they are the same franchise, but I think you can't look to the past all the time. Yes, it's nice to have classic locations coming back. Yes, it's nice to have old exotics returning from time to time. But this is a universe that's moving forward, Like, the reason why I think the moon is fantastic is not just as a sounding board for old stuff, but also because they've used it as a vehicle. I don't know if we're discussing spoilers, but they've used it as a push the narrative forward with all the new stuff you discover there, right? Like, the moon is an old backdrop that gives you context, but it is set in there partly, I think, for the contrast of everything new and with the realization of, hey, the story is going in this direction where we've actually discovered the darkness, Yeah. I think it is fundamentally wrong to look back to the past and to say, well, this is what we had and this is what we're missing from the game right now. Those two games, yes, they're part of the same franchise, and yes, they have the same bones, but they're still two fundamentally different animals. And I think that at this current state in time, looking backwards to what we had in something like, say, Rise of Iron, is still somewhat of a mistake. Like, it's got to be a case of moving forward. And it's not to say that there aren't things that you can implement from the old games that, could be good in today's era. But it's very much one of these things of saying, the best days are ahead of us, not behind us. Like this is very much one of those moments where we've got to look back and acknowledge what was good, but more importantly, look forward to what we can build that's new.
I love that. I love that thought.
I feel like that's kind of where Destiny is right now. And that's why I say that Shadowkeep is the biggest hype. Because, it's all these things such as Armor 2.0, such as all of the new content that we're getting with all of the narrative stuff. I mean, it's really
well, they're rolling it out over the season. So you've got the season of the Undying right now, and I've been really loving your videos that you kind of dive into the different books, just the connection into like philosophy and it's eerie. It's very, in a way, eerie because it leaves me going, who the hell do I trust? Do I trust my gut? Do I trust my ears? Do I trust my eyes?
Right. And at the end of the day, when you sit there and you're asking questions about a narrative or any kind of moral conundrum or any story that poses that to you, isn't that ultimately the goal? Is to make you sit there and ask questions of yourself? Like, the eerie kind of feeling and thought that you have at this moment in time too, I think is entirely the intention. And I think that if that is the case, it is masterfully done. Because this entire season is all about starting to establish this point of saying the world is bigger than you think it is, and you are in trouble, And it establishes that from the very first mission of the campaign, where you sit there and you turn the corner and you see a pyramid ship,
It was very interesting because then it's like, are they here or?
Did expect that? Because realistically, you turn around and then everything suddenly hits you. And it's like, oh, and your brain begins to race a million miles a minute, and you think, I'm not ready for that. This is Destiny 3 level stuff. This is like final boss. Oh God, okay, it's here. Okay, all right, we're going now. And suddenly everything is just that much more serious.
Mm-hmm.
Longer
Did
story.
you feel this invested in the lore of Destiny 1?
Me? Sorry?
Yeah, did you feel this invested in the lore? Like, did you feel... I felt Destiny 1 was much lighter on lore than Destiny 2.
I'd say it contains some classics, but I can definitely agree that it was lighter, because nowadays you have so much more that's coming out of the narrative team. What I will say is that I was invested in Destiny 1's lore for sure. It's not to say that I was uninterested in it. What I will say now is that if you are a lore fan, there is more than there used to be. And I think that's partly because of the lessons that the studio has learned, and that's also partly because of the fact that they know that there are people who really dig this stuff, So back in the day when Seth Dickinson, wrote the Books of Sorrow, and everyone got to read those for the first time, those moments will still be those resounding points at which everybody gets to sit there and say, like, hey, this is one of the best things that we've seen in Destiny's lore. The difference is now we get to see more things like that. We've got the Unveiling lore book. We've got Aspect, which is one of the craziest, most interesting, weirdest looks into the Vex we've ever had. And it is possibly one of the more important lore books for this entire expansion set. You've got all of the smaller stories, like Eris sending letters to people. You've got The Inquisition of the Damned, which is a lore book all about the Hive on the Moon and Crota's progeny, just as everything is starting to settle down, and just as everything is, I think this is actually supposed to be set before Shadowkeep and everything. So, yeah, it's kind of the story of the evolution of the Hidden Swarm. And all of these things are fantastic, and you have all of these great moments now. Sure, some of them don't immediately well up to everyone's crazy expectations of things like the Books of Sorrow, but we have so much more of it. It's expansive and it's vast. It's all wonderful. It's really good.
So I want to get your opinion, and before we kind of dive into just a lot of the questions that we have for you, is that you talk about Destiny 2 as a forward momentum, and it's about looking forward. From a narrative perspective, from a gameplay perspective, what does that actually, like, how does that translate to you? How do we get to the next chapter? Luke Smith laid out that they've got a 5-year plan, and whether that includes an actual Destiny 3 or some other evolution of the game to this action MMO that they have stated that it is, it's like, what does that look for you? Like, how do we, because when you look at Destiny 1 to Destiny 2, it is that chapter, right? Like, that story happened. This is the story as it evolves now. You can still go and experience that Destiny 1 story. You can go experience the Destiny 2 story. Like, how do we transition forward? Is that what does that look to you from a lore and a narrative perspective? Is that some kind of massive event? Is that something that the darkness is teasing about our salvation?
I think that it is a massive event, and the thing that everybody keeps on talking about is, or at least at the end of the campaign of Destiny 2, what everyone talked about was that this was a new golden age, right? And that everyone was existing in this time where all of a sudden enlightenment was upon us once again, and we had a chance to really reestablish ourselves. The thing about that is the golden age is always followed by the collapse, and lo and behold, Ikora now talks about, well, if you stand next to Ikora in the tower, it now talks about, this moment of, it's not a question of whether the collapse is coming or not, it's a question of if. So if you want my crazy spinfoil theory that's backed up by nothing that's concrete enough to actually confirm, I think we lose the city. I think the Traveler gets untethered from its position over Earth, and I think we follow it around as a fleet, and our new tower, so to speak, is on the deck of a command ship. That's my prediction. And my prediction is then that the entirety of the War of the Darkness is about reclaiming our old worlds, and it's about reclaiming the city, and it's about taking a moment to sit back and acknowledge not only the fragility of mankind, but also the resilience of it, Plus, I think that's the next logical step in terms of the feel of Destiny as a universe, Take a look at Battlestar Galactica, right? There is a fundamentally, visceral feel to that universe, at least the 2004 one. And you have that moment whenever you watch an episode of BSG where you feel grounded and it feels real. and where you sit there and you feel as though you're watching the parts of a greater machine turning. When you see Adama in his office, you understand that this is the pinnacle of command, and this is, the retreat that he has from the central deck of Galactica, where everything is chaos. And when you see, Starbuck and Apollo outside of the flight briefing deck, and when they're in the officers' quarters or something, they're playing cards, it feels as though this thing is alive, like the entirety of the fleet. And I feel like that's the next step, because not only have we not ever seen the people down in the city below and, actually had a chance to interact with them, but also we've constantly had this notion that we are all powerful being thrown at us. And now there is something that genuinely has a chance to challenge that. And so this is the ultimate next step that we have to take. We have to have something come up to us and make us prove that we really are as powerful as we think we are. So that for me is what I think would happen next. I can't confirm any of that. Like, there's nothing that in any concrete manner says this is what will happen. It's what I hope would happen. And in addition to, it fleshes out like the entirety of the side of the city that we've never seen, or at least the forces of the city. Like Dead Orbit has a fleet. The city has ships at its command. It has frames. And even in the first mission of Shadowkeep, you start to see that, really appear. You see a true battlefield that's taking place right before your eyes, with city frames that can actually like kill the wizards that are attacking you, and gunships overhead that will deal proper damage to enemies, and blueberries in your party that now feel like they're actually part of this just ramshackle, suddenly called to action Guardian force that's been sent to quickly respond to things. That feeling of being part of something way bigger in a very visceral sense is what I really want them to double down on. And that's, I think, what they'll get to when they move on to their next big chapter.
That's the first thing I noticed about when you step on the moon, that just that massive amount of chaos, lots of people running around, all working towards that progress of getting back onto the moon. Did you see the meme though that was really kind of dealing with like Zavala and talking about like Forsaken and then Shadowkeep, essentially alluding to the fact like, Cade's dead. We're gonna, we can't help. And then it's like, moon's haunted. Everybody assemble. Like, we're gonna go get the moon back. I appreciated some of the notes. I thought that meme was funny. And then I appreciated some of the notes in which that the Guardians, they were monitoring the moons and the moon situation. They were like, yeah, we saw them, building the tower and doing these other things, and we were just kind of from afar wondering, looking at it, and now it becomes a priority in which that we have to have that kind of that global response.
Yeah, and I mean, you see, for that for me as well as the difference, right? Like the way that you look at the theming of Forsaken and its villains, the Tangled Shore, Thieves Landing, the Barons of the Scorn, they're all outlaws, and effectively this is the difference between fighting against a band of what are effectively petty criminals in a space that is not the city's jurisdiction, which is, technically under the control of the Awoken, where we have not en masse been invited until a law card that arrives later down the line within Forsaken itself. At that point, it's not about our fight. And whilst it's very much a personal one, and whilst we go out to the Tangled Shore and actually start killing barons left, right, and center, I very much understand the response there. The moon is very different, though. And I feel like it's also kind of, for the sake of the narrative, it's almost fitting that it happens. Because here's the thing. This is not the first time the city's done this, This isn't the first time that an army of Guardians marched on the moon and said, hey, let's establish a zone where we can control things, and then all of a sudden we encounter a force that we are really not prepared to fight.
Right.
The last time that happened, it was literally called the Great Disaster. And the only reason why it's not been called the Great Disaster this time is because that disaster is probably a can that we've kicked down the road. It's, very much meant to call back to the history of Destiny's Vanguard's decisions over reclaiming the moon, over all the different times in the city where we have seen Guardians believe they're powerful enough, and then they've quite decidedly been proven wrong. So yeah, I completely understand what you're saying there, but from a narrative standpoint, there is actually a really good reason and a good theme behind actually making this huge response. So yeah.
It was fun to participate in. Go ahead, Chris.
You say from a narrative standpoint. So to pivot just a little bit, one of the big stark differences between Destiny 1 and Destiny 2 is just that the entire gaming landscape has shifted over that time. And we talk about the prevalence of like Mixer, Twitch, YouTube, and just gaming as a whole is much more pronounced with every year that goes on. So with that, you have almost this secondary force, and we see it used for good and for against developers, where the content creators now seem to have an effect on what a community becomes. So does that content creation and that kind of earned media, somebody like you that can really dive into the lore and explain things so far beyond a cutscene in a game, does that give the narrative team more power to tell a comprehensive story, or do you think they could do it regardless?
It's a bit of both. It's a bit of so let me give you an idea of what really comes down to this. I'm going to give you an idea through a couple of examples. I want to go ahead and state that in some senses it probably helps them, and in some senses it really does not. So how could it possibly help them? Well, you have more eyes on a topic, and you have more people that can express a common interest, and that gives them the ideas of what narrative threads they might want to tug on. You know, like the options are all there, but there might be some that they think would be really exciting, but they're not sure. And then all of a sudden, when you see this massive upswell of love and support for a particular narrative thread, you have way more confidence to pull on it and say, hey, this is how things are going to unravel. The problem then becomes that zealotry in itself. And I want to go ahead and give you the best example, which undoubtedly comes from Warmind, right? Mm-hmm. We, as a lore community, and I am very much guilty of this as well, had a misconception about what was going on with Rasputin. And we believed that Rasputin was one of the Warminds. Turns out there's only one Warmind, and it is Rasputin. That everything else that was previously mentioned were subminds. And they actually explained this in the lore, and lots of people were very angry that preconceived notion was challenged, and that becomes really difficult for the narrative team. I'll give you another example that I myself have fed and made worse, which is this idea of the Deepstone Crypt, right? So at a certain point in time, I made a video which was talking about the Deepstone Crypt and how Cade talks about people from Clovis Bray, and how he, at a certain later point, gives Petra a note saying it's on Enceladus. Now, he is not necessarily referring to the Deepstone Crypt when he says that, right? Like, there is no proof that those two sentences are connected, but they're said very close in proximity to each other with regards to the actual voice lines. So that's where I ended up getting my own misinformed knowledge with regards to that. Undoubtedly, I have then potentially pigeonholed the narrative team into something there. So it's one of these things of, you need to be really careful with regards to what you say. And I won't lie, that terrifies the heck out of me. I tear my hair out over stuff like this, because at the end of the day, whenever I make a simple gaffe like that, and then hundreds of thousands of people are led to believe something, if it turns out that's wrong, all of a sudden, I have inadvertently caused a bunch of people to send harassment and hate to a developer. And that's horrifying. That really is terrifying.
How do you manage that within the community? But you were going to finish your thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, by that same token, this is my job now, and the only way I get to keep on moving forward with it is be more responsible. And this kind of feeds into what you're asking next, is how do I manage that? In terms of doing things from the community, nowadays my entire go-to line with all of this stuff is basically enforcing what isn't speculation, and also trying to give people the platform for freely thinking about it themselves, and saying like, hey, these are possibilities, but these particular ones over here aren't confirmed. But what are your thoughts? And leaving the field as open as possible, I have to be more vague and much less conclusive about things, because Lord knows I don't want to be sitting there with this thing of, I don't want to cause harm for people that are already doing one of the hardest jobs I can think of. So yeah, man, it's terrifying. To answer that original question, bad things can happen, and managing that responsibility is really, really tricky.
Does content creation give the developers, even outside of lore, a free pass to not put this more of the stuff in the game. I think Destiny 2 has done a better job of putting lore into the game itself. But what I mean, at least where we see it a lot, is that
as in,
guides
as
and
in
teaching,
someone else makes up the difference, right? Where it's
right?
not taught
Like,
in the game.
we're just gonna let the content community clarify this. We're gonna, we'll work with them, we'll manage it, but we're not gonna actually bake it into the game. Like, it's a part of the thing. It's not going to be going anyway anytime soon. But that's a common question that we actually hear, is that, oh, they're not going to put X in the game because somebody on YouTube is going to go ahead and do it.
So yes and no. I think that content creators, no matter what side of things they're doing, whether it's lore or guides or PvP, should always be an auxiliary to the game itself. And it's one of my things that I will always shout about. And to give you an idea of what I think the narrative team could do a little better, is actually introducing the basics. So take a look at something such as, say, Angry Joe's review of Destiny 2, which, I'll go ahead and openly say that I think there are a few mistakes and a few flaws in there and a few misunderstandings, which is fine. Like, nobody's perfect, and I say that as a lore guy who's literally able to nitpick anybody, so whatever. But one of the things that he absolutely nails home is a point at which Rasputin is mentioned, and then he goes, who the hell's Rasputin?
Yeah.
Because he doesn't remember from Destiny 1, he doesn't know, and Destiny 2 all over doesn't have any moment at which it actually sits down and explains that up until the Warmind expansion. That's 8 months down the road. He's not there for that. He's not staying around. Not everybody is going to be here still. So what I think is necessary in some instances are proper ways of explaining the basics, like this isn't just a way of saying this is a tutorial and you need to get somebody educated on how to pull the trigger in a first-person shooter. What it is saying is that for every single side of the game, you need to have that baseline of knowledge available for everyone. And it really reflects strongly in the narrative, which is why, one of my biggest hopes is that at some point, whenever they make an addition to New Light, they'll just go ahead and they'll add a whole bunch of new books that basically give people who have no idea what's going on in Destiny this really easy, accessible surface level of knowledge. So it can be really simple things like a 2-paragraph, like barely 12-line long lore book with every page, lore page for each character, right? That just gives you a little bit of information on them, lets you understand what they are and where they are in the world. And I understand that there's a lot of those topics, but something like this is of absolute utmost value to players, because at the end of the day, Destiny does have a lot of esoteric stuff, when I sit there and I use some kind of common terminology saying like, oh god, there's a Vex sacrificing at that conflux, go kill it. Like, half of the words in that sentence don't make sense to someone who's just jumped into Destiny. You may not know what the Vex are, you have no idea what a conflux looks like, you don't understand what you mean by saying they're sacrificing, Like, the more understandable thing for me to say there is, oh god, the robot thing is disappearing at the tower, go shoot it, Like, we have weird terminology in here, and it's way easier for people to go ahead and understand that if they all have a baseline of knowledge. And it sounds like I'm tailoring to people who aren't hobbyists, but that's the big problem that I think Destiny has right now, which is that when you are starting this, we have so much phenomenal depth that you can get into, but the base knowledge you need to understand some of it, or at least to start picking away at things, isn't necessarily there. And yeah, it's fine to have stuff that's deeply referential of old stuff. So when, at the end of the aspect lore book, it mentions like a reference to a sentence or something, or it talks about Praedith during a few of the entries, or it talks about the 4 Ishtar researchers, which sent out 227 copies of their team into the Vex networks. Like, it's amazing to reference all of that stuff. But if you don't have a base idea of what the Vex are in the first place, you've got a problem. So that's, basically all I'd say is keep doing the really deep stuff. But yeah, try and establish that baseline of knowledge,
They've come a long way. Because like when you go from the Grimoire cards to not, the lore wasn't even in game. You have to go to a website, and I was always like, man, I would absolutely spend time in loading screens reading these cards and not on the website if they gave me that ability, and they did. So one of the things that I think is very clear, and so I want to talk a little bit about the Bungie Activision split, because when you guessed correctly, I left with Curse of Osiris. What brought me back wasn't actually when they announced that, but that actually had me perk up my ears and say, come again? Like, okay, this could be really good or really bad, because like regardless of like everybody's love-hate relationship with Activision Blizzard as a company, they got the money, and it's like all of a sudden it's like you're sitting here like, are you cutting off, you know, the source, and is that going to starve the game? You know, are players willing to help support the game financially? But then over the course of this summer, and I actually returned to this summer specifically, they start really just communicating. And like you talked about Deej and the hard job that the community team does, and it's like, honestly, I felt like they had their shackles taken off. I felt like we are seeing a whole different side of Bungie, a Bungie that we've seen in the past and that we always kind of wished were there, and then we actually probably knew were there, but they're not inhibited by somebody telling them they can't call this an MMO. They can't say that. They can't truly listen to what the player base is wanting. And so over the course of this summer, that's essentially where I started seeing what I've always believed Destiny could be. So my question to you is that, like, where do you sit now? It's been, I think, 6 months since they announced the Activision split. Obviously, this is the start of that, like, because it's no longer in the Blizzard store. It's no longer, you know, they've got that full separation.
It's Steam now, yeah.
Yeah. So how are you feeling regarding that separation 6 months in? And then talk to me also about like what you thought when you first heard that news, and then how's that led up to this point now?
So I think the first thing that's really worth saying is that anything I give is my perspective, and clearly is no commentary on some kind of inner workings at Bungie. Like, people seem to think that content creators somehow have this insight and that we know everything about Bungie. Let's be really clear. No, that's not the case. Like, I sit here and I'm relatively speaking ignorant of what goes on at Bungie. So whatever I say is not necessarily going to correlate with what's happened. What I will also say is, as far as what I feel, at first, there was both a little bit of relief and a little bit of apprehension, because a publisher gives you a lot of support, as a lot of game developers will be able to tell you. And so the fact that Bungie had decided to self-publish was a really interesting kind of, like, it was a huge shift, right? And honestly, from that moment, the way that Bungie seemed to communicate felt different. And I don't know if there's correlation to causation here, but yeah, it felt like the community team was able to open up a lot more about things. Again, I can't say that as correlation and causation. I really don't know if that's the case. It could simply be that the mood of the studio was different, and they were feeling more confident in communicating now that they were completely in control. It could simply be that it's just my perspective, and that's what was going on. As for everything that it led to, I feel that when you actually look at the ways in which Destiny has changed, for the most part, it's been really positive, and that split can be sort of thanked for some of those changes, you know. Cross-save, I think, is one of those really big examples. New Light and going free to play is probably one of those big examples. The changes to the way that they sell DLC, where you have an a la carte way of buying it. You don't need Forsaken to own Shadowkeep, and you don't need Shadowkeep to own Forsaken, or all this other nonsense. That's all really good. And I think those decisions have come directly. Oh, and also no PS4 exclusive anymore. Those are definitely stuff that was directly tied in with Activision. But you know, there's other things where I don't know if you can directly correlate things to that. So I feel really good about it at this moment in time. When it actually came out, I was really kind of in a 50-50 state. What I would definitely say right now is that the jury is still out on what this has really done. This is something that we will be able to see the effect of in a few years' time, you know, and this is something that Bungie is going to have to keep its players kind of updated about, in terms of what this means for how they change their business and things. So yeah, it's an interesting place to be. I'd say there's definitely some good that's come out of it, and as for the rest, we'll see what happens, man.
So from a narrative perspective, and essentially the a la carte way that people can buy the content now, I think that's definitely, the a la carte is definitely the right way to go. From a narrative perspective, do Do you have any concerns, or do you feel like there's a risk in breaking up the progress of the story itself? If for some reason I could watch the first movie and then the fourth movie, and without any any way of like going and seeing the second and the third, if I choose not to buy those, like is it make it do you think more difficult from their perspective to tell like a comprehensive story that actually has weight?
A reviewer has never seen a Marvel movie before goes in to see Avengers Endgame. Is it his fault he's not seen all of the others and is confused by all of the stuff? Kind of, yes.
Yes.
By that same token, is it on the movie to somewhat explain some of that stuff along the way? Yes. You know, when Pepper and Tony sit down and have that conversation about how none of them were lost in the snap, and then Pepper says, we were very lucky. When you have that moment where Hawkeye sees his entire family turn to dust in the snap, you know, those are moments that lend necessary context. But the film is not supposed to be like a massive recap of that. Take Destiny as the best example of that. The stories are all self-contained, and yes, they're all linked, and yes, they're all chronological. But I think if you're going to go ahead and judge things on this, whilst you do need to take a look at Destiny in the long run as something that does provide a base knowledge to everything, if you are jumping into a specific story, you should not necessarily be expected to see the depths of something like, say, Forsaken, right? The base knowledge, yes, it can grow, but those little spikes of everything that give you specifics, something like, say, you know, what specifically happened to Riven of a Thousand Voices and what was her motivation. That's not something where I would expect that to be a part of the base knowledge set. It doesn't have the biggest impact on the world outside of what happens in Forsaken. And I think, therefore, stuff like that, where you can call that cut from the baseline of knowledge that players need. And yeah, if it has an impact on the story, you should probably go ahead and play it in that order. But by that same token, Destiny's stories are separated enough that there is something different in every expansion. You know, you kind of understand what I'm getting with there. Like they need a baseline of knowledge, right? They need the Avengers, Thanos snapped and turned half the people in the universe to dust kind of base knowledge, and they need to demonstrate that. But they don't need to go into the origins of Captain Marvel. They don't need to talk about, you know, what's happened in Wakanda now that the Black Panther is no longer there and that their entire royal line is just fallen apart. They don't need to talk about Tony's like feelings as Iron Man and what his previous struggles with the role have been, and his kind of move from someone who really didn't care to someone who was doing things rather selflessly. You know, like they don't need to go into all of the depth and explanation on all of those things. Now they totally can, but it makes for six albums.
Yeah, it makes for like, and might as well just like say, here's the movie starts at 1, and we're just going to take you through the whole series. Chris, you had a question?
Yeah.
So as you talk about like baseline knowledge and then other layers on top of that, whether that be secondary or tertiary or totally just bonus knowledge that nobody really has to know but is interesting, how do you use that to prioritize video creation?
Ooh, that's a really interesting one. So for some videos that I make, it's very much like an appeal to baseline knowledge and saying, you may need to know this because it's something that is so fundamental that if you don't understand it, we've got problems. Best examples, I think, are way back in the launch of Destiny 2, where I took some serious topics that were just baseline important, such as who is Savathun, you know, who's Rasputin, and going into depth about those. When it comes to other topics, a lot of the time I look to go a little bit deeper. So the baseline of knowledge is something that I'll leave behind in favor of talking about something that's really cool that's happened in recent days. So the best recent example of that is talking about what happened in the cryptoglyph. So if you guys got the Shadowkeep Collector's Edition, you've got a physical cryptoglyph that you could pick up and unlock. And inside that, a bunch of codes, which ultimately gave you like a web page, which you could use to piece together with others who had a similar web page, and it created a message. And those messages turned out to be 5 different pages of lore. And that lore then gave implications that Oryx is coming back. Now that's all very esoteric, but it's one of these things where if you sit there and you're really into Destiny's lore, and I say something like the Hive are trying to bring Oryx back to life, you're going to go, oh my God, are you serious? What do you mean? What's going on? So,
how?
You know, it's about, realistically, it's about balancing those two.
We killed him in the Shadow Realm.
Right? So like whenever I look back at my content, I I feel like there is always that notion where I need to try and appeal to what's current whilst also finding a way of giving people base level knowledge. So to give you the best examples recently, I made my video, which is 4 hours long, which is just covering the basics as a summary of the whole story.
Yeah.
I made something which was a tour of the moon, which is, talking through all of the different locations that we got on Shadowkeep and the moon, as I'm talking about the lore of what happened there, talking about what happened back in Destiny 1 and giving people a tour so that if they hadn't been there, they would understand. I made a generic video talking about the darkness as like a topic, as a baseline, because this is knowledge that now we all have to learn and all have to cover. I made something which literally talks about the origins of the universe, which, yeah. How about that? So yeah, it's about appealing to base knowledge, but also after everybody's got that sort of base level, digging down and providing that depth. So yeah, man, it informs content creation, but it's not always going to be like the central thrust of a video. It's got to be something that leads to somewhere deeper. If I gave the best example of what I'm trying to do, I am not looking to reveal the whole iceberg. What I am trying to do is to show you that there is an iceberg, and then to maybe drill down a little bit into the core of it and show you, hey, this is a little sneak peek at everything that's inside. As for the rest of it, go out and start exploring,
So you mentioned the 4-hour massive video. It's just fantastic. I've finished half of it. I watched 2 hours, and it's something that I like to, like you come back in chunks sometimes, because I rarely found myself with 4 hours of uninterrupted time. And I've always, and you did something like this going into Destiny 2, watched all of that. It always is fun to learn, what did I miss or what did I not fully understand? But from a content creation perspective, how long did it actually take you to make that 4-hour video? Because I can't even imagine.
So, let's start from the very beginning on that one.
Yeah.
Because the original idea was something that I started planning about 3 months prior, when I discussed doing the project with Mr. Monkus and discussed what we might want to do on that front. So he then started working on his art portion of it almost immediately, because he had something like 15 pieces or so for the video, some of which he'd already made from past stuff and just happened to be around really conveniently for some parts of it. So, he has this amazing art piece of Lord Saladin, which was perfect for Rise of Iron because it captures all the theme and the notes of that expansion just in a single image. However, there's other pieces he needed to create from scratch. So that was it from his perspective. Then myself and my editor, Captain Tullis, had an entirely different ordeal on our hands. So there was about a month's worth of time that went into the process of raw creation for the video itself. And prior to that, there was about a week worth of time where I was literally just creating videos for a buffer that would give us the time to create the actual video itself. This was stuff where we were uploading content that would then get released a few weeks down the line or maybe a few days later, so that we had a steady stream of videos to keep people entertained while we were working on this really big project. The actual script was just under 30,000 words. It was 28,545, I want to say. The actual amount of data that we transferred back and forth from my online drive, which contains all of my Destiny footage ever, we, between the two of us, downloaded about 1 terabyte worth of footage. The total runtime of the video is 3 hours and 57 minutes, which translates to about 17 gigabytes of final video. But when you've not compressed all of that down, that's easily up to 100 gigs worth of stuff that you're easily putting into each one. And all of this is just, it took a long time. The whole process of actually creating that one single video was just about a month. We are looking at 26, 27, 28 days worth of work. So yeah.
And not just to add in the other videos that you pre-created so that there would be a steady flow of content so that people wouldn't be like,
that I'm not including in this. That was a whole other week prior to all of this even starting. That wasn't part of that was quote unquote pre-production, I guess. But even then, that's less pre-production and more putting things aside so that I could, work on the rest of it. And everything also subdivided. So, yeah.
So time is clearly a resource that limits your production, as does most people. If you had unlimited time, we're getting to the end here, so we have 3 questions that we try to ask people. They're kind of themed around time, power, and budget. So the first one is, if you had unlimited time, you could make videos, play any game you wanted about any subject. What are like videos and games that you just wish you could get to, but other things keep rising to the top?
God, that makes me so happy just to think about
Good.
it. I'd go back through all of Destiny. I'd make the most conclusive series of videos possible, and I would get everything truly 100% peer reviewed by fellow members of the lore community, and I would make sure that no matter what I'm putting out there, all the information I'm giving people is perfect, and then I would try and make them all as wonderful as possible. If I had all of the time in the world, I would then sleep a hell of a lot. It's a hell of a lot more, and I would spend more time not working, because the amount of time that I jump in and spend on these things is rather large, and from time to time that really does run away from me.
Both your answer was both I would work more, and I would not work more with the unlimited time.
Isn't that everything though? Isn't that exactly how it is, right?
Yeah, because you can't help it. It's in, like, I think it's ingrained in you, like, to create and to do that, and then at the same time to also do that and feel rested and not letting it mentally just exhaust you. So if you had the unlimited budget, what feature would you take from any game out there and implant it into Destiny 2?
I would. Okay. Okay. So I would look straight at Mass Effect, and I would say do that. I would say take a look at Mass Effect 2 or Mass Effect 3 and implement the city, the Lost City, as the Citadel, as that variant, as that equivalent. Let our Guardians go down into it, and let the entirety of Destiny be interactive and voice acted, and create this venue by which your Guardian makes unique choices, and where you get to create those unique moments for yourself, right? Like, when I sit there and I think about interactions that you can have in the city, my thought always goes back to this idea of a noble titan, and one day he sits there and he sees suddenly that there's an orphan child on the side of the street, and he's always been there, but this particular time it's like, well, maybe I should sit there and actually ask what's going on. And you sit there, you hear their story, and you hear their parents were in the support personnel of the forces of the city, or the FOTC, which is the military arm of the city itself, and that they were killed as part of the support forces for the Guardian Army in the Great Disaster. I want you to imagine then going out there and then killing the Darkblade from back in Destiny 1, Taken King, getting the Darkblade helm, going back to the child, taking it off and saying, I found the nightmares that killed your parents. This is all that's left. Whenever you sit there and you hear someone telling you about nightmares now, I want you to remember that now I'm their nightmare, and that I will always protect you. Can you imagine a moment like that? Because this is what Destiny never grasps, right? We sit there and we are guardians of the city. We sit there and we have this moment every single time we kill a hive where we've vanquished a monster, but we don't see the impact of that on the people that we're supposed to defend. And it's the one part of Destiny's formula that it's always been missing. We don't see the people we're supposed to be defending. All we see is the loot that we get. And it shouldn't be about that, One of the reasons why people listen to my content, one of the reasons that people sit there and say fundamentally that they enjoy my videos, is because they see a reason to be in Destiny's world. They see a reason to exist. They see a reason to participate. And that is so much more important than I think anyone realizes. Because when you sit there and you actually see somebody and you see a genuine moment where you've made something better in a tangible sense, that is something that is so important in games, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave you the best example of this from Mass Effect. Did you guys remember Mass Effect 2's Overlord DLC?
So for me, I played Mass Effect 1, and I have not played 2 or 3, and I honestly was debating doing it, but then also hoping that they would remaster it.
Do it and buy all the DLC. Right?
Okay.
I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to spoil you for one.
Please, go ahead. I'm never spoiler sensitive. People tell me, tell me the end of the movie, I don't care, I'll still watch it.
So Mass Effect 2 has a DLC called Overlord, and I will always remember this as somebody who is slightly on the spectrum. But the Overlord DLC revolves, and it doesn't start with this premise, but it revolves around you saving somebody who has been strapped into a machine by their brother so they can communicate with, and control the Geth, right? And the only reason their brother can do this is that he's autistic, and his brain is incredible, and mathematically speaking, he's excellent. And he always goes back to the square root of 30.1, right? And that's just his phrase that he continuously repeats because it's something that puts him in a frame of comfort, right? And you save this person from this machine, and it's horrifying, you know? You're revealed this person who's just strapped to a machine in, you know, basically is just spread-eagled, almost like Da Vinci's, I can't remember Da Vinci's sketch.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
But his eyes are like wide open, he's got tubes going down his mouth, and he is clearly in an immense amount of pain, right? And you end the DLC with that choice of either do you allow the research to continue because of the amazing progress that, you know, the organization might make towards understanding and maybe even controlling Geth, or do you stop something that is absolutely morally abhorrent at the cost to what is potentially the greater good? And I cannot sit there and watch that guy inside that machine filled with tubes. So I say, okay, we're shutting this thing down, and he's getting sent to an academy for gifted students that the Alliance has run. Mm-hmm. Mass Effect 3 comes along. That academy is under attack by the same organization that set up, by Cerberus, the same organization that you know, set up the project Overlord in the first place in Mass Effect 2. And David Archer, the guy that you save, is there. And during the mission, you encounter a group of students who obviously don't know you, and they can't trust you immediately. But David is there working on maintaining the shield underneath. And he has his little quirk where he says that line of, you know,
30 square root of 30.
However, he starts with whatever the square root of 30.1 is, and then you finish it for him. You put down the weapon, and he says, "Hello, Commander Shepard." And it's this most incredible moment of you sit there and you're like, oh my God, I saved his life, and now he's come back, and this mission is now just that much more
meaningful.
Yeah.
You sit there and there are consequences to your actions that reach further than just the gun that you happen to pick up that's great for DPS on a boss. You sit there and all of a sudden you are gifted with this moment where you had a tangible impact on the world, and you feel the good that it does. And if it's any better, sure, David opens up a room and says, in that room, guns, lots of guns. That's great too. But like, I sat there, and the minute my Shepard says 30.1, I was blown away, because that was not what I was expecting out of this mission, and it was something that grounded me in the world and made me think I made good choices, man. Like, it made me care. And
Agencies.
that's what I'm looking for, man. I'm looking to care about the world I'm in.
Agency's hard to come by. Now I'm never going to look at the Vitruvian Man again the same way. So Agency's an interesting thing to talk about, especially in the context of Destiny, because you put out a video talking about why Destiny's called Destiny, and use light to kind of adjust the winds of fate, for lack of a simpler sentence. And so it's interesting to think about seeing the impact of that as a budgetary add to the game. With that, as one last question, you have unlimited power. Now we're going the other way. Destiny 2, you believe it's at its height. You get to take one feature from it, and you get to carry it with you off into any game to pull out of your back pocket and use. What game do you take with you to implant into other games? What feature?
Man, that's a really tough one. It's going to sound really weird coming from the lore guy, but I say you take the shooting of Destiny. Because here's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, Destiny as a world is fantastic, and the first thing that you experience when you pick up the Kavosh in the first mission of Destiny 1 is, man, this busted old rifle feels great to shoot, right? Yeah. And that's, like, it's your first point of contact whenever you're stepping into a game, you know? And it doesn't just speak to you from that aspect of, like, hey, this is great to shoot, but it also speaks to you of, you know, this gun is clearly old, and I wonder what the new stuff looks like. If it was anything generally, I'd say guns. I'd say the guns and the shooting of Destiny are just masterful, and they act as the very first real contact in the game from which everything else spills out, you know? Like, I hardly imagine that I could confirm anything like this, but when I sit there and look at Destiny, I find it hard to imagine that it didn't start with people looking at, like, you know, a pulse rifle or an auto rifle or an exotic hand cannon or something like that and saying, what world did this come from? And building it from there, you know? Like, you have the building blocks of the universe. You have darkness and light, you have the Traveler and the city and the Guardians and all this other stuff. But when it comes down to what Destiny viscerally is, when you're doing your moment-to-moment stuff, that moment-to-moment shooting and the gameplay that comes with it, absolutely phenomenal. You know, based on this are the phenomenal moments that you can create in PvP. You can build from here something beautiful, such as what you can experience in a raid when you've mastered a mechanic. Like, it all stems from one key point in the game, and I think that's the shooting. So I'd carry it through.
I can't argue with that. If I was going to, like, one of the things Chris and I have kind of talked about just is with the loading screens, especially if you're playing on console, like, I wish there was something more to do with the ship. If we could shoot something, if we could just, because, like, yeah, you can manage your quest and you can look at your inventory and check your build. That's great that you can do that, but man, like, it'd be great if while we're just sitting here, I could just be blasting something. I don't know.
I want my Normandy, dude. I want a Normandy back. Let's put it that way.
I love the poetic nature of your exploration of Destiny. It's very different than my experience, where I just view it as one of the best shooters ever made. Like when I come back, when I quit Destiny, it was because of some choices that the studio was making. And so then when I came back, everybody's like, well, what do you think of Destiny? Do you like it? And it's like, oh, it was always a good game. Like, it's always had good shooting. It's just a question of if everything surrounding it's as good. So on that note, we have hit time. Is there anything that you wish you'd said? Any final thoughts, Bife? And then where can they find you?
Final thoughts. Be patient with people. Understand that no one is perfect. And if they are doing a particularly hard job and you maybe don't understand it all, do your due diligence to understand it and to access that knowledge. Because at the end of the day, knowledge is power, and it is always important to have empathy along with it so that you can appropriately comment and act on a situation. Be mindful. It's kind of my go-to there.
Chris, what are you working on?
He's so much, I don't know. Things he says are beautifully poetic, and I just feel like I'm walking around with like a hammer as my only tool. So I'm still working through games. I want to play more Destiny right now, so I can tell you that. Brian, we got a lot of stuff coming down the pipe. We're going to BlizzCon.
Mm-hmm.
We got a live letter coming out with Final Fantasy
this Friday.
Patch. Lots going on in the world of Final Fantasy and Destiny and gaming in general. So hopefully it's all good news and we can end this year on a high note. I know we've had some rocky areas with some of our maybe longtime favorite developers, and I'd appreciate 2019 ending on a more positive note.
Yeah, it's 2019. I thought 2019 was going to start off on a high note, and it is just, it's just like, there's been some good things. Like Mario Maker 2. Shadowbringers was a really good, strong launch. Mm-hmm. There's been some really good high points, but my goodness, yeah, like I'm really hopeful the 2020s come in real positive, come in real strong. I think they will. I think there's some things to be excited about on the horizon. I think one of the things that I'm working on, I've been putting out my beginner and intro guides for Destiny. People seem to really be responding to those positively, which is helpful because like that's the whole point. Like, hey guys, like I get that you might not know what this stuff is. Let me just break it down for you. So I've still got plenty of guides and stuff. What's up?
You're doing the Lord's work.
I was worried because before we were doing content creation, like I was like the two games that I just played religiously were Final Fantasy XIV and Destiny. And then we started doing content creation, and then I left Destiny, which was really painful. Like, it was like, I've put a lot of time, I've got a lot of friends that play this, and I just can't support it. And so I've maintained that I'm happy I left because it allowed me to send a message that I wasn't satisfied, and then they've been able to do things, and I'm happy that I've been able to return. And we've always said that if you're going to step away for any reason, you communicate it. And if they fix the reason in which that you left, you should check it out again, because otherwise you're only sending mixed messages, And so we see that a lot. Like, I'm never gonna, I'm not gonna play this game until they add orcs, and then they go and add orcs, and you're like, well, I'm not gonna play. Like, it's like, no. Like, you don't have to like stick with it, but you should at least, yeah, like, don't keep moving the goalposts. Otherwise, they're gonna just start not listening because they're gonna be like, well, we've lost them. You know, it's like I'm not gonna try to even win them back. But I've got 2 videos I'm presently working on that are bigger videos. I'm doing a tier list ranking of the Final Fantasy villains from the series, which I'm very excited about, which as an opinion piece is sure to get positive and negative reception, as all opinions go. And so I'm really excited about that. I don't have an ETA on that. Hopefully before we go out to BlizzCon, I want to have that published. And then I'm also working on a massive review for the Final Fantasy XIV, taking people through my 10 years with it. And then I'm probably going to see about putting out a review on Destiny now that I've finished the campaign. But I want to get into the raid and do a couple things before I actually put pen to paper on talking about my experience with Shadowkeep, because I actually agree with you, what you said earlier. It's a highlight for me, hands down.
B935 or 940 before you go in, just so you know, because that's recommended power. And also it gives you this nice breadth to experience like everything that's going on in the game. Like, do some nightmare hunts.
I'm coming up on 925, so I'm not there yet, but as a not full-time streamer, content creator, like, I play when I play. I get my power for the week, and
I feel
it's like, okay. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm really enjoying Iron Banner, and ultimately want to kind of continue to spend some more time with it. So lots of things that I'm looking forward to doing. If you guys missed the show last week, we had Tiny Blue Games on. That show is live now. Go check it out. A really great conversation with a great small creator who's coming up, playing a lot of different MMORPGs, has a really cool perspective. Next week, again, like we said, we have Comic Storian coming back, talk about patch 5.1, whether that is hands-on impressions or hype for 5.1. It depends on what day they release it. So check out that podcast. Then the following week, we've got Mione on tap. So he's going to be coming on talking about some Final Fantasy XIV as well. And we'll have to try to get some more of our Destiny guys. We had Dado, we've had Rick Caucus. So we've had a lot of good representation with the Destiny community. Bife, I really appreciate you making time today to come and talk and just be so poetic and so insightful as to your experience with Destiny and Shadowkeep and all that. But for Work to Game, my name is Brian.
My name's Chris. Yes. And Bife, thank you so much.
Thank you.
No, we toss it out there. You guys have a great day. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Adios.